All right, guys, welcome to the Q&A today. It is March 13th, 2025. The topic I'm going to cover today was actually spurred by a great question from Dwayne, who asked how to start from scratch in your 40s. As obviously in the context of health and, just getting more in better shape and that kind of thing. And it's a good question, and I want to kind of go through a couple things. I want to address what might be and not that he necessarily meant it this way, but what could be a, shall we say, a preconception in asking the question, or the prerequisite that I kind of want to dispel a little bit by means of encouragement. So if you're someone that you're in your 40s and you haven't particularly taken care of your health in the past, what do you do? Where do you start? And you're just becoming aware of, I have to do things differently because you see the downward slope from here if you continue on your current trajectory as it pertains to your health and wellness, which affects everything else in your life, of course. How you do, how you are as it pertains to taking care of family responsibilities, how you can interact with your community and your church, your performance in the workplace and in business, and that kind of thing. So nobody really truly starts from scratch at 40. You start with the accumulation of your previous life experiences. And so the only person that truly starts from scratch is someone that has a brain injury or something along those lines, where they actually do start from scratch. And so we're not, I mean, and I don't say this to try to correct, anyone for asking the question, but sort of by way of encouragement that your years of life did provide you experiences that you can derive wisdom from, and that you can derive education from, even if that education didn't necessarily apply super well to your health and wellness. The fact that you're asking the question means ultimately it kind of did, or at least get to the point where you realize that something had to change, and is inspiring this sort of change and growth. And so, yes, it's tough to change, but at the same time, those accumulated experiences brought you to this point. And so that is something that you could be grateful for. And so with that being said, there are unique challenges, both physically, socially, and psychologically, to beginning this sort of journey when you're, say, 45 years old, versus if you were 20 years old or 15 years old. I became aware of health, honestly, as about 12 years old, when I was struggling with hypoglycemia. And that was sort of the beginning. And I even bought weights when I was, I think I was 12 years old when I bought some weights at Walmart, and was training in my parents' living room, and doing pull-ups on branches and running on the street and things like that, not really knowing what I was doing. I tried to up my protein intake by buying protein powder, and I used it intermittently. I was pretty consistent about working out, but it wasn't structured. I did get kind of fit. I did get reasonably strong for someone that was doing what I was doing, but it's not like I made some crazy progress. I struggled to even gain weight or anything, and didn't realize that you have to eat a lot. No, there was nobody around to tell me yeah, you're going to have to increase your food intake by double what you're doing if you want to get results at that age, which is what I would have had to do, because I was underweight until I was in my late 20s, to a point that it was unhealthy. So all that to kind of say, it is obviously easier to change while you're in those developmental years, but there's no time like the present, obviously, to start. So what are the particular things that we have to take into consideration? One, I want to address this from a few different points of view: the physical, but also the mental, which also applies to even the social and things like that. So I'll start with the latter, and then we'll address the former later on, because it's kind of easier to address. And the mental aspect of it is challenging, because the older you become, the more you have ingrained habits in your life that may be conflicting with your health goals, and conflicting with generally just being a healthy human. And so a lot of this, to start, the hardest thing to do will be going to the gym and establishing that as a routine. Routines are more difficult to acquire the older you become. But obviously, as we know, going to the gym isn't enough because there are probably bad dietary habits that need to be taken care of and other things. So the other two common things I see are things like social engagement. So if you have a habit of going out after after work with the guys, especially going to the bar and having a few beers, you might be able to live a responsible life as it pertains to your sobriety with this type of habit, but not as it pertains to your health in general. And so if that's the way you're used to socializing, maybe you might have to go for a time where you don't go to bars because you don't know what it's like to go to a bar without drinking alcohol. And in general, we should limit our alcohol intake to two moderate servings per week. And any more than that, and it seems like that's when health consequences begin to set in. And usually, honestly, most of us could just do with not even having one serving per week. I would say that usually like we'd want to limit to just a couple times a month. And that's probably actually more reasonable in my opinion. So what you can do is start changing those social expectations with your friends, coworkers, and other associates that suggest, hey, can we go somewhere else? Can we do something else? Or just say, no, I'm not available for that, which is hard to do. You'll feel like you lose your social support system, but also evaluate, was that social support system actually a support system or an anchor holding you in, toward bad habits, making you sort of stuck in bad habits and making it harder to establish the good habits that you need. And so sometimes you may have to find a new social circle and sort of change all of those variables, which again, the older you become, the harder it is, especially if you have long established habits. Now, it could also be, what do you do on the weekends? You have people you hang out with, there's a lot of drinking and a lot of overeating involved. You might have to skip those types of situations for a while to become healthier. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is going to be your family life. If one spouse is on board and the other is not, then you may have challenges around what's for dinner and what's for breakfast and lunch and what kind of foods get bought at the grocery store. Should we keep snacks in the house? Because if one spouse is like, I want my snacks, and the other one realizes that they shouldn't be eating snacks, for many people, the first step is going to be purging the house of snacks. And so if those are still there, you might not be in a situation where you can remove snacks from the house. And it's just going to be a pure discipline and motivation type of scenario and self-control. It does make it harder. So those are sort of things that we always need to be aware of when making these kinds of changes, that you want to not just do the things, that's one thing, but that takes pure willpower. And you also want to have supporting systems in place, including where are you and who are you with, and are you around the kind of people that will support you establishing good habits. And so a big component of that is going to be maybe finding a new social circle, different people to be around. Make friends with people in the gym, make friends with a different group of people at your church and that sort of thing. And maybe seeking online relationships and people that you can socialize with, talk to on the phone and that sort of thing, that you have a different support system that's actually supporting good, healthy habits versus habits that might be unhealthy for you and potentially leading towards, an earlier death and certainly an earlier onset of various kinds of disease states. So now moving towards the physical, which is kind of easier to deal with, especially once you have the right supporting systems in place. What do you do? Obviously, the first step is to go to the gym, but how broken down is your body? I've worked with some people that they can just hop right in the gym and do fine, but I've got even a couple of people I'm working with right now. We couldn't just jump into barbell movements because they have joint issues or back issues or things like that make it so that just doing some of the basic movements cause pains that they can't deal with it. It's actually damaging to begin to do a barbell squat for some people from the get-go. And so we have to make certain compromises where we're moving, but in a different way. And that is where having a custom program becomes very important, because if you go try to follow starting strength and you're someone that your knees just really jacked up or really unstable, that maybe you can't be doing squats, or if your shoulder's so bad you can't flat bench, then hopping on the flat bench every 3 times a week and trying to PR every week for several months while you're in your linear progression becomes not helpful. And so you need certain types of corrective movements. You need to strengthen certain things in a way that's beneficial without causing further injury or harm. And then, of course, diet is just going to be the big one. That's the big thing that's hard to change, especially if you've had the same, cereal every day forever or something along those lines. Establishing different tastes becomes very important. You can make all sorts of macros taste good, but you do have to be creative with it. And, we do our best with the diet plans to make sure that you have those kinds of options, of course, but it is different and more difficult. And typically the food that's better for you requires a lot more preparation. And so there's the time element. A big piece of this is going to be meal prep. Sunday or Saturday, if you grill a bunch of meat or cook up a bunch of meat in the oven, then that makes the rest of the week go a lot easier, because then you don't necessarily have to prepare a bunch of food. Get a big rice cooker, cook a bunch of rice for the whole week. Over the weekend, you can throw your meat and your rice in a bunch of containers, and then you have your food for the week. And then at most, maybe you're prepping salads, which just take a few minutes for your lunches. Same thing for breakfast. We can make eggs every morning, which is ideal. But if you're strapped for time, then we're going to tend towards Greek yogurt. Or if you have a dairy issue, then you're going to be looking towards certain meats. You don't want it to be the classic breakfast meats necessarily, because they're just really high fat, high calorie, and consuming a half a pound of breakfast sausage is it's just not that much fun either. But it would be very, very high calorie. And so we don't necessarily want to do that, because that can actually cause further problems. And so one very important aspect of this is do this one step at a time. Most people are not the kind of personality where jumping all in and changing your sleep habits, your eating habits, and your gym habits all in the same week is feasible. Sometimes you're just not in a position mentally to be able to do that. And it's like, these are the kinds of people that struggle very much, because they make a New Year's resolution, they get a gym membership, and they're in the gym for 2 or 3 weeks. And by the time February comes around, they're not in the gym. Maybe they make an appearance for a few weeks over the summer, and then next thing you know, the whole year goes by and you've trained like a dozen times, which is good that you did that, but it doesn't actually confer much in the way of benefit, because it's a lack of consistency and regularity. And an aspect of this is that we're trying to build a foundation towards sustainable, consistent practice that will permit someone to establish a foundation of health. And if you're doing it in such a way that's not sustainable for you, then you're going to be in, then you're sort of setting yourself up for failure. And so one approach that can work really well is fix one meal at a time. And I usually say start with breakfast, because usually that's the easiest one to modify, because a lot of us can eat our own breakfast separate from our families or whoever else. You're usually at home, so you're not often in a social situation where it feels weird or strange to have a different lunch from everybody, or to skip going out for lunch with friends at work or coworkers. And then, dinner is even more challenging still, because usually that's shared with the family. And so changing the dinner menu can be pretty tough. It can be a kind of a tall order, and something that needs to be done carefully, because it may affect other people besides yourself. So breakfast is usually where I tell people to start, and the morning routine, a morning routine that involves getting outside for hopefully 5 minutes or so, and possibly engaging in some sort of cold exposure. So a cold shower, hopping in a cold plunge or something along those lines for 4 to 5 minutes minimum. But maybe when you start, that's too much. And so you do it for 1 minute. And then the next week you do it for 1.5 minutes, and you work your way up to that threshold. Maybe diving in all at once is just too much for you. And so it's okay to make incremental progress. You don't necessarily have to win the war by winning one decisive battle. You can win a war by fighting many battles over many weeks and months. Keep in mind that anyone's journey toward health is never ending. I have been taking what I would consider to be good care of my health for many years, but I'm always making modifications as my needs change and as things around me change. The vitamins I take now are different from the vitamins that I took a year ago or a few years ago, because my body's changed, my environment's changed, and my needs have changed. And same thing with my diet. I've even over time, you may develop intolerances to certain foods, or you may actually because your health gets better, you may be able to reincorporate certain foods that you previously didn't have tolerances for, because your gut health is better, and your digestion is just in general better. And so along those lines, going to the gym, a lot of people do well just jumping in 4 days a week, or maybe 3 days. For some people, that is a huge mental obstacle to overcome. So with some people, what I do is I have them go to the gym once a week, and the rest of the time they're going for walks. Or when they go to the gym, say 3 times a week, they're only actually lifting weights for like a couple movements, and they're just spending a lot of time on the treadmill, maybe doing some stretches and some body weight stuff, because it's just a lot mentally easier to overcome. And then over the months, we start layering in more and more actual weight with free weights or machines or something like that as appropriate to the individual. And one aspect of that is also that, again, you might be so broken down health wise and in your body that it's not healthy for you to do a barbell squat, for example, because of an issue with an ankle or an issue with a knee. And so you actually have to ease into it different ways. And so maybe we're going to do hack squats on the hack squat machine, or maybe we're going to do just body weight squats, or even Hatfield squats, because you need the stability from holding on to something, the stability of holding on to something. So the name of the game is generally going to be incremental progress, and also understanding what progress is. Progress isn't getting there all at once in 1 week or in 1 day. Progress is making better choices every day. And so that little bit better every day stacks up. People are often very, very disappointed in their short-term results. Very disappointed. It can be very discouraging when you train for 2 months, for example. For the first time in your life, you're totally consistent for 2 months, and then you look in the mirror and you look at your numbers and they haven't changed that much. You realize, like, wow, I have so far to go. Don't be discouraged by that. The victory at that point is just the fact that you showed up. It takes a lot more time, and then you look back over the years and you go, wow, I'm really surprised I came this far. I would use myself as an example. When I first started training, I just hoped someday that I would bench 225, that I would overhead press 135, and then I figured, like, maybe if I can squat in the 300s, I'd be happy. Maybe 3 plates if things go really well. Same thing for my deadlift. Uh, I wound up hitting all of those numbers within the first year of training. But the first couple of months, you wouldn't necessarily known that that's what was going to happen. And then now I've gone on to squat 677 pounds. I've sniffed 700 pounds. I've benched 405. Never thought that would happen in my lifetime, but that took several years. It took several years of specific work towards those goals. Those goals shouldn't necessarily be everyone's goals. Those were just my goals and specific to me. And I actually had to take risks with my health to accomplish those strength goals. My blood pressure ran high while I was gaining weight sometimes. Not super high, but high enough that I wouldn't have wanted to keep it there for more than a couple months at a time. And so someone that's in the pursuit of strength, if you come in pre-diabetic, some people, that's reversible really fast. Even type 2 diabetes I've seen be, reversed on paper within a handful of months. I've got other people I'm working with, and we've been working for a couple years, and they're off of 2 of the 3 medications they were on at the time. But if they skip, one of the medications, then their blood sugar still gets out of control. And so it's going to be a longer process. The main struggle for those types of people does honestly tend to be compliance. It's not necessarily that if they followed the plan perfectly, that they would still be in that boat. But again, kind of going back to the previous conversation, this comes down to a lot more than just the mechanics of changing your diet and going to the gym. Because in a vacuum, that should be simple, should be easy. That's all it really takes. But there are people around you that have expectations about your social behaviors and what you're going to eat at the restaurant, and other norms that you're actually not necessarily fighting your own expectations, but the expectations of others that are around you, and social settings and family settings, that you sort of have to change identities in a certain sense before those people's eyes. And that's challenging. I don't want to say it's nothing. And for some people, that can be more challenging than others. And so making those incremental steps, it makes it's a lot easier to bite off one bit at a time. So like I mentioned, you change breakfast first. Maybe the next thing to change is lunches. You start packing your lunches. And when you do go out with coworkers, you just get a salad. And it might make you look weird or strange. And a lot of people might even kind of make fun of you for it, partly because they feel bad that they're not doing the same type of thing. But that's okay. It will require a certain degree of willpower and discipline. I'm not saying it won't. I don't want to come across that way. But the sort of, I don't want to say silver lining, but the hope there is that you can do it piece by piece, such that these discipline areas don't come crashing down on you all at once. You can do one thing at a time, and it can work as long as you're making that kind of progress. I have one client that I'm working with. He's had a lot of knee and lower back issues, very significantly. And we couldn't, again, just jump all in and go hard on the barbell lifts. We've had to be incremental. And he struggled with consistency. He's had times where life's busy, and you can still train anyway. I don't want to really, honestly, don't want to give allowance to that, but I also understand that it's just very difficult. And so even with intermittent training and missing some training, actually quite a bit of training sometimes, and sometimes missing out on a very ideal diet. Just last week, he skipped training so that he could do a project in the backyard that involved digging up a lot of concrete and a lot of fence work and other things like that. Previously, that kind of work would have wrecked him, would have left his lower back totally a mess for weeks, would have aggravated his knee and caused all sorts of problems. This week, he reported that he was fine, a little bit sore because he's doing things he's not used to, but he was surprised that he was able to do that kind of work and just be like, he was good. He didn't have any injuries from it. He just had some muscle soreness, and the joints were good. His back actually felt just fine. And so even though it felt like he wasn't making the progress in the gym that he wanted, his body had obviously become far more resilient than he had realized in just a handful of months. I haven't even been working with him for a year. And so this speaks again to, you just keep trying, you keep showing up every day, and it's not always perfect, it's not always ideal, but you do make that progress over time. And the thing to keep in mind if you're over 40 is it's all slower. That's what's unique to being middle-aged and older. Everything's just slower. Your body adapts slower. It's harder for your mind to adapt to paradigm shifts of behaving differently in different social situations and learning how to navigate these things. It becomes more difficult to educate yourself on, how do I eat when I'm at, whenever it's Thanksgiving, Christmas, I do a lot of talks on that, but even how to navigate your birthday party for someone in your family or a friend, or someone else's kids or something like that. Like, what do you do? And how to handle that, because it's the first time that you've been intentional about your health in that sort of situation. And so it's okay if it's not perfect the first time you do it. It's you walk away, try not to be discouraged, learn your lessons, and you can talk to me and the other coaches. We'll help you have the right lessons learned or the right mindset going to that situation, so that you can flourish and enjoy whatever that social setting is, but in a way that has some degree of discipline and care to it, so that you're not compromising your health while you're also just enjoying a nice time with family and friends. And the other thing that's, of course, unique to being older is that we have to deal with previous injuries. Hardly anybody gets to 40 without some sort of injury that you might not even have chronic pain, but it's really easy to aggravate it. You have that knee or that back thing or that elbow or that shoulder or whatever it is, and we just have to have care towards how we address training in that kind of context. And it might seem painfully slow, but again, put in the work for several months or a year or several years, you're going to look back and go, wow, I actually don't deal with that problem very much anymore, because I've learned how to navigate it. We've made so much progress that we've become resilient. And that daily showing up, one of the most important aspects that it will provide for you is mental and physical resilience, so that you become more capable, not just in the gym, but outside of the gym. You become harder to injure when you're helping someone move. You become someone who's more capable of dealing with stress in the workplace, or stress between, working with maybe it's family difficulties or other social challenges with other people, conflict, that sort of thing, because your mind has become more disciplined and engaged and intentional, and it tends to spill over into other areas. But don't expect these huge shifts in your mind to happen overnight. They can happen overnight when you're a teenager or maybe in your 20s, but once you're, past 30 and then you get into your 40s, it does become harder for these things to happen. So the physical and mental changes do take more time. This is okay. Now, someone who's that old, you probably feel like like a sense of urgency, like I got to do this now though because like I have less time. You do have less time, but you have physical constraints that you have to work around. You have to work with what you got, and the mental shift has already happened that you're addressing those problems. That's already a big win. Take that win and use it as fuel for continued growth and discipline and becoming better every day. A phrase I like to just say is better daily. What does that mean? Well, it means something specifically, that's a little bit different for everybody. But in general, what it means is, can you look back on an upward trajectory and trend toward your goals of becoming healthier and more resilient? Our goals are in this area are multifaceted. Obviously, we want to just get stronger and we want to put on muscle mass, but it's mostly for the goal of being someone who's more physically capable and being someone who's more mentally capable to deal with the stresses and challenges of everyday life. If you get in a car accident and that's out of your control, would you rather be someone that trained 3 or 4 times a week or someone who never trained? I think we all know that the outcome would be very different. When it comes time to help your friend move or help your kids move or something like that, would you rather be the person that's been training regularly or the person who is not? The person who is not, after 40, is a lot more likely to have back pain for several days after helping someone move. But if you're training regularly, it probably doesn't mean much to you. You might have some soreness because it's unique and different, and then you're fine. There's no injury, there's no anything like that. And if anything, it was actually good for you because it helped build resilience instead of actually causing injury. And that's the big difference, is it makes some of these things that used to be a liability and a risk for you actually become beneficial, helpful, and part of getting you closer to your goals, such that like you go to participate in those physical activities and they actually help you advance your goals because it's novel and different and you're resilient and you're capable, but you also get the added benefit of like you get to adapt to something a little bit different and unique. And so what used to become a liability now becomes an asset because of your consistency. And that's ultimately where we all want to be headed. And you do have to balance those types of activities with your training. I made the mistake a few years ago of pushing towards some very ambitious strength goals, which that wasn't a mistake. A lot of things in my life were actually aligned where it was a good time for me to do that. I had the headspace and the time, and I when I started was injury free. However, where I lived, there was a very significant flood, and I did not back off on my training. I was hitting PRs in the gym semi-regularly, particularly on squat, which is my strongest lift. And it also cost me the most fatigue, and it had, whatever you're the strongest at a certain point when you become advanced, that's going to be the thing that causes you, it's going to give you the highest risk for injury and also going to be the most fatiguing. I continued pushing my training very, very hard while helping flood victims, do demo work on their houses to avoid mold, help them move their goods out of their houses and things like that, which I'm not used to doing demo work. And I specifically, when doing a bunch of tear down where I was doing a lot of pulling up motions, so hip hinge extension type of motions, I developed glute tendonitis, which I felt it a little bit when I was doing it, but it really wasn't that bad. But then I went to PR my squat a couple weeks later, and I wound up tearing my adductors, on the adductor on my left leg, and developing that it basically just lit on fire, that glute tendonitis. It took me 18 months to recover from that. I went through 2 coaches during that time trying to get someone to help me. And one of them was a doctor of physical therapy from Duke, and he just had a very difficult time figuring things out. And actually, we made it worse during that time. It wasn't until I just took over and tried to apply the fundamentals that I know, because I did want to work with someone else who, other coaches that might have been able to be an asset. And I did learn a lot working from them, fortunately. But that time that should have been for rehab ended up actually making me worse. And so I just rehabbed it myself. And about 3 or 4 months later, I was able to actually hit a PR on my deadlift, or no, match my previous PR on my deadlift is actually what I did, and was able to just get what I needed. And then I was able to actually have a great competition season the next year. But for about 18 months, which is a significant portion of my lifting career, I was kind of out of commission. As far as my lower body was concerned, I couldn't even squat 2 plates. 225 was too heavy for me. It caused severe pain. And so I was just doing whatever I could to try to maintain muscle mass with partial range of motion movements, and stretching and corrective movements and things like that. And I was able to, after I came out of that, again, be basically at my strongest ever. But it did take a lot of time, a lot of careful attention to detail, a lot of regularity, and faith in the process, which can also be a particular struggle when things are moving slowly. So I do get it, because I've been there and kind of done that with some of similar areas in my training career. And there were times where it felt like, am I ever going to deadlift again? My wife had a better deadlift than me during this time. She had a better squat than me during that time. And so, like, there was times I wondered, like, am I ever going to be able to do this again? My bench stinks, so I'm never going to be able to enjoy that as fully as I could. My squat and my deadlift actually being somewhat respectable. And so it was a challenging time for me as I watched the time fly by and what felt like no real progress being made. But I did stick to the process, and at the end of that, I was rewarded with a good result. But that's kind of what you have to do, is just sort of have that faith and have that belief and trust the process and sort of see it through, be consistent. And also, anyone that's working with, that I'm working with, and you have these pains and injuries, I try to have very regular conversation. But like, and some people think that they're bothering me when they reach out with questions and they have pains, and like, oh, I know you just changed my program, but whatever, and then they start, asking the question. And sometimes people will delay a few weeks asking me questions when I'm doing custom programming or, custom diet plans, and be like, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, well, guess what? You pay a month or a weekly fee for me to do whatever you need. And if what you need is for me to make significant changes to your program on a week-to-week basis, or your diet on a week-to-week basis, that's what you're paying for. And that's what I'm here for. And that's what I'm very happy to do. Sometimes we need more hands-on attention from a coach, and sometimes we don't. That's okay. That's part of the coaching relationship. And so I don't have a problem doing that. And that is my obligation to anybody that I'm working with. And so, like, you're not bothering me by asking me to do the thing that I told you I wanted to do for you. Sometimes you might go through seasons where you need more than others. That's okay. But I certainly don't want to make speaking up a barrier toward a barrier that gets in the way of making progress. And so I want to conclude this by just saying that for those of you that may be dealing with anything like this, come talk to me. And those of you that are struggling with, just not seeing the progress as quickly as you wanted, if you're over 40 in particular, yeah, it's more challenging. It's harder the older you get. But you're here now, and that does put you a step ahead of a lot of people. And the fact that you're doing the things that need to be done should be an encouragement to you, and at least take that victory for what it is. It is a victory that you're showing up regularly. It is a victory that you're getting better about your diet. It is a victory that you're making continued progress. Even if it feels very, very slow, any progress is progress. So be happy with that. And if you feel like you should be getting better results, at the end of all this, come talk to me or any of the other coaches. It may be that there's a supplement to consider. It may be that there's a medical intervention to consider. Maybe you have a genuinely actually do have a hormone issue that could be addressed through lifestyle or supplementation or something along those lines. And so there are options here. Even healing certain types of injuries, they can be massively accelerated with peptides and other things like that we have expertise in. So